tomorrow, America's Liberation Day, according to Trump. That's when the new tariffs are expected to go into effect against Canada and Mexico, our neighbors,
Right.
and China and the European Union. The White House is calling this Make America Wealthy Again. And they're going to have a big press conference in a couple of hours in the Rose Garden at the White House. Trump says he's expecting $5 trillion in U.S. investments when his tariffs take effect. But he also, David K. Johnston, says he doesn't care if these tariffs push the cost of a car in America way up high. The markets are all over the place. What's going on with Liberation Day? Are we really being liberated from anything?
Yes, we're being liberated of our money.
Oh, is that right?
I mean, tariffs are really a scheme to provide additional revenue and what are called by economists supra-normal, that is, above what should be by market standards profits to the owners of manufacturing companies, domestic manufacturing companies. And so when we raise the price of a car built in Germany or England or Japan, the domestic manufacturers of cars are going to raise their prices almost up to the amount of the competing vehicle with the tariff applied to it. And that just increases their profits. Even if they sell fewer cars, their profits should still go up. The problem here is that Donald doesn't understand competitive market economics. He is a mercantilist. You know, the reason that the Queen of Spain, not Isabella, but the Queen of Spain, who was a teenage girl, sent the fleet to attack the British was because British pirates in the Caribbean stole a lot of gold from the Spanish. And they did this again and again and again, because back in that day, 400 or 500 years ago, every dollar, every piece of gold you had was a dollar or a piece of gold I didn't have. And there was no concept of growing wealth. Mm-hmm. And so that's why, you know, our Constitution even provides for pirates. The references to letters of marque, M-A-R-Q-U-E. And we're really quite good as a species at creating wealth. We're not so good at distributing that wealth, but we're very good at creating wealth. And Donald doesn't understand any of that, even though he has a degree in economics. And think about this, you know, the only union president America ever had as president of the United States, Ronald Reagan, set out to destroy unions and did a damn good job of it. The president who has an economics degree, Donald Trump, doesn't know anything about economics because he didn't go to class. He didn't learn anything. His daddy
he was the best student in the world, wasn't he? The top
right.
student.
He
was so
great.
He
says. It's kind of funny for a guy who is so eager to promote himself. There's no record anywhere of him making Dean's List, honor roll, being magna or summa, none whatsoever. Because of course it just didn't happen, and Donald doesn't understand that people can go check the record that exists. So tomorrow, I will not be surprised if Donald punts. He makes a lot of noise and then doesn't really do what we think he's going to do, which is a blanket tariffs on all goods.
Yeah.
But if he does this, the American economy will get a lot worse. And let me give you one of the great examples. I've gotten 3 emails in the last 3 days for traveling from the East Coast to Europe, round trip for $449 on brand name airlines, Scandinavian, United, and sorry, I don't remember the third one at the moment. If you want to go to Europe, it's a good time to go because the airlines have already announced that they're going to retire a lot of big planes, older planes, Boeing 767s and 757s in particular, and some of the older 777s that came out in the late 90s or mid 90s. But until they can contractually remove those planes, they're going to have lots of seats and they're going to try really hard to sell them cheap. So you want to get on the plane at SFO or LAX and go to Europe, or send a college graduate there, a high school graduate, to go backpacking. The time is here. Do it now. because once they've retired a lot of planes and have their seats adjusted for the demand, which will be a lot lower. Now, I live about 90 miles by car from the Canadian border and 3 hours from Toronto. There's already a palpable decline in people coming here from Canada, and it's going to get worse. So this is not going to make for a strong, healthy economy. And Donald has this just cockamamie idea you can't get out of his head that China and Canada and Mexico are going to pay these tariffs when they're not going to pay anything. We're going to pay.
It seems like he's using the tariffs up till now as a negotiating tactic. But there, I would think, is only so much you can do with that before it starts to look like you're really not going to do much at all. And it loses its negotiating power because it looks like it's something you're not serious about.
Well, he's gotten a couple of things that he thinks make him look good. The president of Mexico sent 10,000 Mexican soldiers up near the border, and he hails that as a great victory. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I don't think the record is clear yet on what they're doing and what that means.
Mm-hmm.
But imagine you owned Kim Boren widgets, and Donald Trump says, stop making your widgets in China or finishing them up and polishing them in Canada. Make them here in the United States. And if you don't, there's going to be this huge tariff. And so you sit down with your team and outside vendors and say, okay, we're not going to build a new widget factory. We're going to go out and build it east of LA or over near Stockton in the Central Valley. Mm-hmm. And they tell you, well, the new factory is going to cost you $1 billion. And from the moment we leave this room till the first widget comes off the assembly line, it's going to be, let's assume they can do it quickly, 7 years. You're going to make $1 billion decision with a 7-year deferral till it happens on the basis of Donald Trump, who flip-flops on policies and in particular tariffs by the week? No, of course you're not going to do that because you're a sane, normal person and you're trying to maximize profits. Donald's just trying to bamboozle people and cover up the fact that he has no idea what he's doing. None.
So his former Secretary of the Interior, who is a Congressman, Ryan Zinke from Montana, he says Trump loves to wave these tariffs around because it's personal power. That he doesn't have to go through Congress. He can exercise personal power. And for him, it makes him feel strong and, I don't know, manly, apparently.
Yeah, no, Zinke is exactly right about that. Because Donald isn't a person of substance, he's a person of appearances. And that's what Donald is, all appearances. You know, he appears to be a genius businessman. No, he's not. You know, he appears to be one of the biggest developers in New York, never was. He appears to be the great Don Juan, you know, nonsense. And don't forget, you know, he really only weighs 225 pounds, which anybody looking at him can see. Of course, that's true. Just look at him. To those who aren't watching my face, I'm being sarcastic. Donald is in a job now where he has people who are really trying to make things happen. He's not the one making them happen. And, you know, Congress has given the president these emergency powers on tariffs. The Senate is debating, I think it's this afternoon, but it may be tomorrow, limiting or taking away that power from Trump. Trump put out on Truth Social a statement attacking Tim Kaine, the junior senator from Virginia, who was Hillary Clinton's running mate 8 years ago, in which he says, you know, he and the other Democrats are trying to stop my tariffs on fentanyl. I'm sorry. What we want to do is raise the price of fentanyl through tariffs. I thought we wanted to eliminate fentanyl, except for its proper use by physicians in in properly prescribed medical conditions. I mean, it just indicates that he doesn't know what he's doing. And the volume of fentanyl compared to all the other trade is bupkis. It's an irrelevancy. It's, you know, one sheet of paper in the Library of Congress.
So you mentioned this, and I'll go into it a little further, but Susan Collins, a Republican from Maine, is saying that she will back a resolution led by Virginia Senator Kaine, who's a Democrat, to terminate this national emergency Trump declared last month, citing this fentanyl trafficking and illegal immigration. And this is what Trump has used to justify these 25% across the board tariffs on Canada. And so now you have Republicans and Democrats lining up to oppose these Trump tariffs. And I don't know if that's a win for Trump.
It's not a win for Trump if they actually act. In the case of Susan Collins, she always talks a good game and then she folds.
Yeah.
So we'll see if Susan Collins actually goes through and has the spine to stand up to Donald Trump on any issue. But members of Congress and the Senate are hearing from the economic interests in this country that, what are you doing here? You're sowing disruption. You're sowing uncertainty. And if there's anything you want in business, it's certainty. You certainly want, there's so many things you have no control over. You don't need your government adding to things that you have no control over. And if the constituents in various Republican districts, people have been showing up and they stand up in front of the cameras and they say, "Hi, I'm a lifelong Republican, and what the H are you doing?"
Yeah.
Why are you disrupting Social Security? Oh, we're not disrupting Social Security. We're going to make it better. We're stopping all those thieves. And you can hear the whole room erupt because they know that's nonsense. There's no massive thievery going on.
Yeah.
Now they've said they're going to throw out the existing Social Security computer systems, which are based largely on ancient computer languages. Languages from the 1950s and 60s, that's like Linear B from the ancient Mediterranean, or the language of the Sumerians 4,000 years ago. But you know what? Those systems work. They have flaws and whatnot, but they've been refined and they work just fine. And if you were going to do that, if you're going to create a new system, you would want to keep the current system running while you set up the new system. You test it with a small number of people, and then you migrate people over to the new system. That's not what they're going to do. And if they aren't stopped, there's going to come a day when millions of people are going to discover they don't have their Social Security check. But remember what Trump's billionaire Secretary of Commerce said. Well, if you don't send a check, my mother wouldn't call and complain.
Right. The complainers are the fraudsters. Right.
Yeah. The way to identify the fraudsters is they'll be the first to complain. I mean, this is such a cockamamie, out of touch view of the world. And yet lots of people who depend on Social Security, if not for themselves, then for, their mother or grandmother or grandfather, they don't have the resources to get by. Take away Social Security and about 90% of seniors will be in poverty.
Yeah. And
yet you see people standing up other people and endorsing this. And it's because they don't understand how things work. They don't have the critical thinking skills to appreciate this, and they want to believe that Donald Trump is their savior, even though he's the exact opposite.
You mentioned that not a mark of success is creating anxiety in the economy. And I saw this article, BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, and the headline reads that he says almost everyone he talks to is more anxious about the economy than at any time in recent history.
Yeah. I believe me, I absolutely understand that. We've taken almost all of our money, we did this a few months ago, out of the stock market and put it into cash, where you can earn basically the rate of inflation plus the taxes on it. And that's about it. You're not going to have any growth, but there's no downside risk. And the market's down. It continues trending downward. Yep. And if these tariffs come in, it's going to drop very sharply, which means the people who have cash will have a buying opportunity somewhere in the future. But no one who took and successfully completed 2 economics courses thinks what Donald Trump is saying is correct. Tariffs are very important to developing countries if they want to develop their own industry. That's why we use tariffs in the very beginning. You want to buy, you're living in the new United States of America, and you need to buy a stove, and the domestic manufacturers aren't very good. They don't have very much capital. They can't produce very much. So you're going to order your stove from England. And by putting a tariff on that stove, it allowed the domestic maker to raise their price, get more money, use it to improve their factories, improve their techniques of production until they were up to the speed of the Brits, and then they could compete with them. They are inherently anti-competitive, and they are redistributional up. And, that's my trilogy on the American economy: perfectly legal on taxes, free lunch on subsidies, the fine print on monopolies and restraint of trade, is all about these stealth mechanisms that took money from 99% of the public and put it into the pockets of people at the top, so that almost all the wealth growth in this country in the last 40, 50 years has been among people in the top 10%. About 34 million people right now, or about 10 million households. And that's where all the growth is going. And even within that group, it's overwhelmingly going to the top 10th of 1%. That's 1 in 1,000 households. And that's Trump's crowd. People who either are in or are servants to or aspire to be in the $2.5 million and up income class. And that has nothing to do with the reality of most Americans. But, they don't know that. I mean, I remember I had lunch with a guy here in Rochester, very wealthy, successful financier. And he was telling me he just didn't believe any of this nonsense about people living on $25,000 a year. This was in the late 90s, raising a family on $500 a week, $26,000. It was just ridiculous. I asked him what he paid his secretary. I said, he didn't give me the exact amount, but what's the range? And he hedged a little. I said, I'm going to guess north of 60 and perhaps as much as 80. And he went, yeah. And that makes sense, because he needs a very super highly skilled secretary who understands finance and has flawless grammar, something that's disappearing fast in this country.
Yeah.
And I said, well, the problem, Jeff, is that you got in contact with people in the general labor pool. And I suggested he and I have lunch with a mutual friend who owned a steel company. They cut and bend steel, the metal bending and metal cutting business. And he said, why? And I said, because he hires out of the general labor pool, and he can tell you the social problems. Now, he is more in your camp than mine about how to address these issues, but he's going to tell you that you're completely wrong. There really are lots of families struggling to raise kids on $25,000 a year, which in today's money would be $45,000, I think, a little less than double. And the people around Trump, the people in his cabinet, they're from this top tier. And by the way, don't miss what else Donald is doing. He is pardoning high-level, white-collar criminals.
Yeah.
He fired the prosecutor who had gotten the indictment of the CEO of the Fatburger chain, which we don't have back here, but it's a big chain out west, who embezzled $47 million from the company, according to the indictment. He fired that guy. Presumably that charge will now go away. There was another white-collar CEO literally on his way to prison after being sentenced. In the van, Donald pardoned him. He's pardoned yet another head CEO who I think his trial had not yet come about. But he is systematically pardoning these rich white thieves.
Yeah.
Now, to think that this is being done because of his ideological commitment and there's nothing else going on around is, frankly, Kim, naive.
Yeah.
I doubt that they're directly paying off Donald, but could they be doing something on behalf of, one of his kids, some obligation he has somewhere, helping Elon Musk? Oh, yeah. I think that's a highly reasonable assumption to make.
You mentioned
Jen, can you come here?
You mentioned the man who was pardoned on his way to jail. That was Aussie Media CEO Carlos Watson,
yes,
who was convicted of a financial conspiracy. He pardoned electric truck CEO's Trevor Milton, who was free on bail pending his appeal, but facing 4 years in prison and hundreds of million dollars in restitution. He seems to be pardoning people that are in big business, including crypto.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is, and what you're seeing here is a criminal presidency.
Yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump's a lifelong career criminal. He's now got 34 felony convictions, and if he hadn't been elected, he would be convicted by now in other cases. And the people he's pardoning are other white-collar criminals, because after all, when we do things, that's different. We're special.
I saw a comment by Steve Bannon. He said, if Trump doesn't win in 2028, that Trump will be going to jail. And I was thinking, well, why? Because all of the cases against him haven't either been dismissed or seem to be on permanent pause. Has he done something recently that would send him to jail?
Yeah,
Or is that
actually,
being used to stoke fear, like, oh, all you Trumpers that love him better rally around him for a third term?
no, it depends on who becomes president of the United States next. But I mean, the flaw in the Biden era was that while his attorney general, Merrick Garland, did start right away ordering investigations of Trump, he let him go along at a lackadaisical pace. And they made a crucial legal error. They brought the strongest case, which was the stolen national security documents case, in Florida.
Right.
The Constitution says that you must be tried in the jurisdiction where the crime occurred. Well, if you rob a bank and you take the money to your home, the crime is not at your home. Your crime is at the bank. And they should have prosecuted Donald Trump in D.C. The Justice Department believed, for whatever reason, probably noise from Trump's lawyers or conservative people within the Justice Department, that Trump would fight any indictment in D.C. And I think that was just a major mistake, because had they indicted him in D.C., which was the scene of the crime, this would have gone through, and he would not have had the luxury of a dishonest judge, an utterly corrupt judge, Eileen Cannon, overseeing his case, and who is a very, very good shot at being the next justice of the United States Supreme Court, despite being utterly unqualified. And just let me point out, Kim, you don't have to be a lawyer to be on the Supreme Court. You don't have to be a member of Congress to be the Speaker of the House, which leads me to just another point. There's a lot of discussion about this third term issue you brought up. The Constitution is quite clear. You cannot be elected more than twice to be president. And if you become president the way Jerry Ford did, and you serve more than, I think it's 26 months, more than 2 years, you can only run once. I'd give you 6 or 6.5 years. But there are ways around this. One of them is Donald runs as vice president, and whoever is president resigns. Now, why you would keep that deal and give up being president of the United States for Donald is an interesting question. But, presumably someone who is as utterly lacking in morals and principles as J.D. Vance might go along with that. His ego might be weak enough that he'd go along with it. But there's another method. You get the Republicans, if they retain control of the House, which I think is increasingly unlikely, to make you Speaker. Then you get two toadies elected president and vice president. They resign. The next person in line is the Speaker of the House. A Supreme Court not run by ideologues, I think, would look at, you ran as vice president, the president then resigns so you can become president for a third term, would look at that as a sham. But the whole notion of what are shams is being rapidly eroded in this country. And, we are legalizing, and we've been doing this since before Trump. Our Supreme Court has been legalizing corruption step by step now for a number of years. If you're the governor of California and I need something, if I walk up to you and say, hey, Kim, here's $1 million. If you do this for me, that's the corruption even to this Supreme Court. But if I say, I really need this, my friend, it would really be helpful. And then as you're providing the advice, I say, by the way, wouldn't your kids love to come in my private jet and stay on my private island for a week's vacation? That's not a bribe.
Oh.
This is an absurdity and a complete lack of recognition of human behavior. So, yeah, I think it's highly likely that Trump, if he is out of office in January of 29, which is highly uncertain in my mind. I don't see him peacefully leaving the White House, just as I didn't believe he'd do it 4 years ago, and he did not.
He didn't.
He will have committed crimes between now and then. And by the way, let me point out, he has not filed his legally required Statement of Financial Condition with the Office of Government Ethics, OGE, Office of Government Ethics, OGE.gov, and made it clear he doesn't intend to file it. So for all we know, Vladimir Putin's putting money in his pocket. Elon Musk has guaranteed his roughly $600 billion in civil judgments that are currently undergoing appeal. We don't know. We don't, I mean, and then even if he does file, of course, Donald's finances are often smoke and mirrors.
And technically, it doesn't matter if he files or not because he has immunity for everything, right? Just about.
He has immunity for any official act.
Oh, yeah.
I've read that decision and thought about that very point. And you could argue that failure to commit an official act you have immunity for. We do that a lot in the Constitution. We have the Commerce Clause. And then if you look at the reverse of it, it's the Dormant Commerce Clause. So I don't know how this Supreme Court would rule on his failing to do an official act, filing that document. But you know what? There are penalties in the law if you fail to do it. They might uphold those.
Well, I know our time is running out, but I have this one more story I wanted to throw at you. And I would think, in my mind, Harvard Law School is a pretty prestigious place, right?
Oh, yeah.
So a majority of the Harvard Law School faculty sent this letter to their students over the weekend, warning that the rule of law now faces grave threats under the Trump administration. This is the faculty at Harvard Law School. They wrote in their individual capacities, not as representatives of Harvard Law, but they voiced their concerns, according to this article, that legal precepts and the institutions designed to uphold them are starting to buckle. And in doing so, they referenced President Trump's executive orders targeting these individual law firms for retribution because of their legal work that have challenged him in the past. And so they're worried about our legal system. These are very prestigious Harvard law professors that are looking at what's going on and warning their students, saying we're in trouble.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think that they're right and they're too mild about this. I mean, we saw the Paul Weiss law firm knuckle under to Donald Trump and promise to provide, I think it's $40 million of pro bono legal aid to friends of his. In a normal administration, we would say that's extortion. Extortion is the other side of bribery. You know, bribery is I give you money to do something. Extortion is you better do it or I'll hurt you. And he's made it clear he will hurt people and hurt firms. He's tried to take away national security clearance for law firms so that they cannot represent people, particularly firms with a long history of representing Democrats. You know, we have firms that their specialty is they represent Republican interests and ones who do Democratic Party interests. And he's trying to further unlevel the playing field. So the concerns being raised by Harvard Law School, I think, are very valid. I've written a DC report that on February 15th, when Donald announced that anything he does to save the country cannot be illegal, that's the day, without question, he became our dictator, and he's just consolidating power. And that the White House 3 times, a few days later, posted a picture of him with a regal crown and "Long live the king" is the caption. And, you know, you can say, well, he's just trying to own the libs. These are not silly juvenile matters. These are serious matters. He is trying to consolidate power. That's why he's fired inspectors general. He's gotten rid of individuals all throughout the government who are a challenge or threat to his absolute monarchical power, if not tyrannical power. And we just saw that 3 professors at Yale, Timothy Snyder, who wrote On Freedom and on Tyranny, very important books in this age and very short, quick books.
He's been on the show, as a matter of fact.
Yes,
recently.
no, I know he has. Jason Stanley, who wrote This Is How Fascism Works, another short but very important book. And then Marcy Shore, a historian of Eastern Europe. They've all left Yale to go to the University of Toronto. And Jason Stanley's quite explicit. I do not want my children to grow up in a fascistic country.
Wow.
And we are living right now under a dictatorship. They are simply consolidating power. They are simply making sure that forces can't rise up against them. I noticed somebody in the chat, by the way, said I put my money in cash. What does that mean, or where did I put it? There's something called a federal money market money. And right now, money markets, depending on which one you're in, are paying 3.7 to 4.2% interest. Inflation was running under Joe Biden. It was down to below the average since World War II at about 2.7%. Under Trump, it's rising and rising fast. The latest report, if it holds up, would be a 5% annual inflation rate, essentially double what Biden was down to at the end of his administration. So money in a money market fund, as more money comes into it, the rates will go down, by the way. But more people say I'm out of the market, the rates will come down. But the markets are down, and I believe they'll continue to be down. Nobody knows where markets are going to go. It may be that he announces the tariffs and the markets suddenly rise rapidly and I'll lose out. That's okay. At my age, I'm worried about protecting the downside, not gaining on the upside. And by the time you're my age, I hope people, if they have managed to save and invest money, don't think of it as their money. It's not my money. I'm the steward of my children and grandchildren's money. Little as they will get, it's not mine, it's theirs. And I just get to use the income during my lifetime.
I have so much more to talk to you about, from scientists saying there's a climate of fear in America.
Oh,
to
of course there is.
Yeah, and people who are not the elite that we were talking about before, the people who voted because of the price of eggs, who are so upset now that the price of insulin is spiking. There's so much more I could say and keep you on for another 2 hours, but I know I'm over my David K. Johnston time frame, and so thank you for being here. I just love you, and I'm so lucky to have you.
Well, thank you, Kim. Good principle for people to think about going forward. Economically, in terms of individual liberty, in terms of the integrity of law enforcement, it is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. It's going to get a lot worse. And if you use that as your guiding principle, are things getting better or worse, you'll do better riding this out. I wouldn't do anything risky right now. I would, if you don't need to buy a car and your car's going to hold up, or you can make it hold up for 3 or 4 years, keep driving that thing. Don't go out and spend a lot of money. This is not the time to go invest in a big house or something else. On the other hand, if you can get one of those super cheap airfares to Europe while they're here, if you plan to go to Europe, now's the time to go.
I've heard people are leaving. A lot of these scientists are checking out.
Yes.
When is that tripwire where it gets so bad that it's time to check out?
Well, most people will never leave. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
Most people, no matter what, will not leave. I have a column that'll go up about this very issue of DC Report probably tomorrow. And it's about the 3 Yale professors and me, and some other people. But it's the trend line you need to pay attention to. And things like this are always murky. There's a lot of noise in the signal. But the general signal is this is a white male supremacist administration that believes in protecting its friends and prosecuting its enemies while claiming to be pure as the driven snow, and that's pursuing economic policies that nobody, and I mean nobody, who understands economics believes can work.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.